Welcome to Ricardo's Time. Today we have a very special guest, Martin Hooss. He's a German scholar who is leading the project called Conversations in Atlantis with Carry On Beyond. And now he's also working in my organization, Ricardo's Time. Thanks again, Martin, for being here.
It's a pleasure to be back.
I would like to talk about happiness because if you go on in Latin America, doesn't matter the place, the country, and you ask anyone, are you happy? The response is going to be related to an emotional state. They're going to relate it to a satisfaction or to an origin of the moment, or if they had a good day. What's Ayn Rand's approach to happiness, and how does it differentiate from a traditional?
Well, Ayn Rand defines happiness as that state of consciousness which proceeds from the achievement of one's values. And by values here, she does not mean, of course, emotional states, but she means rational values, something which you have identified independently as an objective value for yourself, which you then pursue and achieve. Now, this is her definition. And here we can already see that she was very Aristotelian in her approach, because Aristotle, of course, for him, the most important thing we could achieve in life was not the pleasure of the moment, because Aristotle was not a hedonist. But what we wanted to achieve, we should achieve, according to Aristotle, was what he called eudaimonia. So it's flourishing, happiness in the long run, not as a short-term state. So Rand here was very close to Aristotle. It's about achieving rational values. So what you need to first do is you need to figure out what is an important value for yourself, rationally and independently. And then you need to pursue that value. Now, certainly there is a lot of optionality involved here. For instance, people all need relaxation from time to time. But whether you play chess or poker or billiard or dart, that depends because people are all different. But there are certain things which we need to pursue objectively, such as, for instance, food or shelter, which we all need. But we can live either in a skyscraper or someone else might rather prefer to live in a small village. So there's a lot of optionality involved. But what happiness is that you project values into the future, long-term values. You do so independently, you have integrity, you stand by your own judgment, you pursue those values constantly and without contradiction. And if you then achieve those objective rational values, then you will become happy. But it is not about emotions, it's about your rational convictions.
So how would a person look like, or how would look a happy person in real life, in your experience, compared to someone who's just following their emotions, let's say?
Well, of course, man has free will. So the difficulty here is that if you go to the streets and if you start talking to people, they might seem very happy, but I don't think that most of them are, because a lot of people do not know what they want from life. They have never consciously figured out what is important value to them. And people can be very good at faking. But the point here is we have to look at the virtue of honesty. What does honesty mean? A lot of people would answer that question by arguing, well, speaking the truth in a dialogue, not manipulating other people, speaking the truth when you talk with other people. Well, this is part of honesty, but it's not the primary issue. Primarily, honesty demands being honest with yourself. Now, you can fake certain values or virtues or even your state of happiness in the presence of another human being. And a lot of people do that. But does that make them happy? No. So a lot of people will tell you they are happy. But if you then ask closer what makes them happy, they will give you a lot of interesting answers which don't seem to make much sense. And why is that so? Because they have no idea how to achieve happiness and they only like to pretend. They are fakers. So if you want to ask me again, how many people are happy out there whom you meet? I would say, unfortunately, very little. And this is why it's so important that you have a rational framework, that you understand what is important to yourself, and that you achieve those values. And this is what we will talk about today.
Great. So the other day, I was talking with a family member, and I asked her, to be happy, you need to be selfish. And she was very surprised because she said, how can you be happy being selfish? Selfish means do whatever you want at the expense of other people. How can you be happy doing that? It's like being a predator. What's Ayn Rand's take on that?
Well, I recently gave an entire lecture on that, which can be found online. I gave it in Belgrade at Nikon, which was a conference organized by my friends from the Ayn Rand Center Europe. So if you want to have my full ideas about this topic, please have a look at that lecture and you can find out my full proof there. So to put it very briefly here, a lot of people, as you have pointed out, I think this goes for 90% plus of all people, probably 99%, they would say that love is selfless, that it's altruism that governs the sphere of love. This is ultimately the Christian idea, the idea that you have to love everybody indiscriminately, regardless of whether they have any values or virtues. So Ayn Rand considers this as very wrong, as very evil. Why? Well, in order to understand why she considers love as, properly speaking, the most selfish emotion, we first need to understand what selfishness means. A lot of people think that selfishness means exploiting other people, manipulating other people, using other people for your own advantage. Now, what Rand points out in the introduction to the virtue of selfishness is this conception is utterly flawed. It's utterly wrong. Because the point is, selfishness means, primarily speaking, and you can look back at ancient Greece, for instance, which was a very selfish society in the best sense of the word, that selfishness means, primarily speaking, being concerned with one's own self-interest, thinking about what will make you happy and how you become happy. Now, if you bring another person into the picture, then we are already talking about the political sphere. We are already talking about how we're dealing with other people. Selfishness is primarily an ethical, a moral concept. It's about how you live your own life. So selfishness means not manipulating other people. It means being concerned with your own self-interest, figuring out rationally what is important, aim for you, how you can achieve it, how you become happy, because happiness should be our aim, our key moral aim in life. Now, if you translate that theory now into the sphere of love, you come up with two very different ideas. If you hold the original idea of selfishness, that selfishness means what it doesn't mean, manipulating other people, then of course the result would be a very toxic relationship in which one person exploits the other person, rules over them, tries to control them. Now, this is not selfish love. This is the sphere of altruism, because you're primarily concerned with the other. What selfish love probably entails is that you have two people who know who they are, what they want from life, who are independent thinkers, and those people would form the best relationships. Why is that so? Because each person in the relationship has their own goals and values which they pursue selfishly. They identify the same values and virtues in the other person, and then they kind of look in the same direction. They have figured out what they both want from life, they both share the same values, and they pursue them together. You see, there is no sacrifice involved in such a relationship. Quite the opposite. Two people pursue their own selfish, rational interests. They live together, they profit from one another, and they live a harmonious life together. So this, properly speaking, is a selfish love. And the point here is, it would be quite ironic to say something, well, I am marrying you just for your sake. I don't care whether you live or die, but I am completely selfless. So I am marrying you just for your sake, just for your good. That will be a very, very evil and wrong definition of love. But love is, properly speaking, selfish because you identify someone else as a great value. The other person becomes a value in your own hierarchy of values. And if you have identified your partner as a great value, you better make sure that the other person is happy because he or she contributes to your own selfish happiness.
Okay, excellent. So one of my first books was The Virtue of Selfishness. And when I recommended it to other people, the responses I got was, how can be selfishness a virtue? What's the answer to that as a framework? I know this is more profound.
This is a very complex question, and anyone who wants to have full proof should really read Ayn Rand's article, The Objectivist Ethics, which is the leading article, the first article of The Virtue of Selfishness. So very briefly, I always like to make the desert island test. So imagine that you are on a desert island. You have to be self-interested. You need to consider yourself as a value, or use a different term. You need to have self-esteem, by which I mean you need to consider yourself as valuable enough to stay in existence. If you are on a desert island, and let us say you figure out rationally which berries you can eat and which are poisonous, and you figure out that, well, it's getting colder, I better build a hut in order to survive winter. If you do not have self-esteem, if you do not consider yourself as someone valuable enough to stay in existence, you will not survive for very long. And the same goes if you are in society. Now, in society, you can certainly, and unfortunately, in a mixed economy where you have a welfare state, exploit other people. So you might not die immediately if you don't have self-esteem. You might not die physically, but you will die spiritually because you would not trust your mind. You would just give up and say, well, everyone else knows better than myself anyway. But in order to become happy, as we said in the first part of this interview, you need to have rational aims and pursue them. And you need to have self-esteem. You need to trust yourself and your own mind in order to come up with your own ideas. And if you face adversaries, which you will in real life, you better defend your ideas. You better have the self-esteem to defend them. So this is why selfishness is so important. On a desert island, it is necessary for physical survival. In society, it is necessary for spiritual survival.
Excellent. So we're talking about virtues such as self-esteem, as you mentioned. And it comes to my mind, this scene here in Latin America. People look at virtues as something that you should practice, of course. But I question the virtues they say they want to practice, such as humility or being humble. If you watch, for instance, a soccer game, and the players, let's say the Peruvian national team wins, and the journalists start interviewing the best player, they won't say, I feel proud, because that would look like, you are being egocentric or just looking for yourself. You need to thank everyone, the rest. How is that not a virtue? Why is that wrong?
So when we talk about virtues, as you said, there are a lot of concepts out there which are considered virtues, but which are not. But what we also need to talk about is the method, because ultimately man is an integrated being of body and soul. And when I say soul, I mean consciousness. So we need to look both at what are considered virtues. Are they virtues, yes or no? And second, why people should practice those virtues. Those two really go hand in hand. So let's focus on the first part, which I think is your question, about the content, about which ideas should be considered virtues. And you brought up humility. Humility is widely considered one of the greatest virtues. That, of course, goes back to Christianity. Because according to Christianity, we should be humble. We should not take any credit for our achievements. And if you read the 10 Commandments, you will see that very much is what the first commandment is about. You should have no other gods. So the point is, you should not consider yourself as some kind of God, but you should say, well, I have not achieved it myself. I rather give credit to God, because ultimately God created the universe. He all gave us certain abilities and certain qualities. And ultimately, you could go as far as saying it's also deterministic universe. Everything has been created by God, and He has already given us our way. We have no free will to change that. So on such a premise, the point is you can never take credit for your own actions. And now the idea is sacralized, of course. And now people say, well, it was not myself who has achieved anything, but it was society. Society paved the way for me, and this is why I cannot take any credit for that. I consider that very wrong, very evil, because this goes hand in hand with self-esteem. Self-esteem is one of the 3 cardinal values, the other ones being reason and purpose. If in a way you sit here, you need to figure out what you want from your own life. Since you're a rational animal, you need to use your mind to figure out what is an important aim for you, what do you want to achieve. And that is your second big value. It's your purpose. You project your purpose into the future. You sit here and, for instance, you might say, I would like to have a great house. Now you can devise the plans and think about which house you want to have. That's your purpose. Now the point is you will not build it or pay someone to build it if you do not have the self-esteem. So self-esteem is necessary to lead you towards your aim. This is why it's so important. But how do we gain self-esteem? Only by being proud of our actions. We need to take credit for our actions. Only in this way can we build self-esteem. And self-esteem, in a way, is necessary to practice all the other virtues. The virtues, in turn, lead us to achieve our values. And as we said in the beginning, by achieving our values, we can achieve happiness. And this is why it is so important to figure out what virtues are and how to prove, as Rand does in the Objectivist Ethics, what concepts need to properly be considered virtues. Now, a second point here, which I really need to make, this is all about content, but it's also about method. I have an entire seminar now on virtues, which I taught here in Peru recently. And what we really need to get away from, I think, is that idea very popular both in mysticism and in all those collectivist regimes, that virtues are something which are imposed on you from the outside. Be virtuous because God said so. Be virtuous because society, exemplified by the dictator, told you what is good or evil. So in those traditional ideas of morality, ethics, virtues, values, all of that is forced on you from the outside. Now, it's no wonder that people do not want to practice any of those virtues if A, they have never accepted them themselves, and B, they at least somehow feel that those concepts are not virtues but vices. So what I say is we need to understand what virtues are and from ourselves, from our inside, accept them as theoretical principles which help us to achieve happiness. So you see, you have a very different framework. Virtues are nothing which are just imposed on you. Virtues are guiding principles which we should accept. You don't have to accept them, you have free will, but which you should accept because you realize that they are good for you to achieve your own selfish happiness.
Okay, so let's go to the next one. You talk about principles, and I would like to ask you, can you be happy betraying your principles?
I can answer you in one word by just saying, no, you can't. You cannot be happy if you betray your own principles. I consider integrity as one of the 7 cardinal virtues, and this ties in with integrity. So let us assume that you are young and now you finished your high school and you're 18 or 19 years old, and then you're in a position, what do you want to study now? I was in that position, a lot of my friends were. Now the point is, you in effect only have one of 2 options. Either you use your own mind, you figure out what you want from your life, which career you want to go into, which career is of interest to you. And again, productiveness is a virtue, but in what field you want to be productive, that you need to have a choose. And you have a whole array of options that you could choose from, which are all properly moral. Now that is what you could do. You rationally decide what you want. Or alternatively, you just blindly follow the mob. You say, well, I would like to study psychology, for instance, but mommy and daddy and my friends, they tell me, well, it is safer to just study to become a lawyer, for instance. So what you would do is you would sacrifice your own values. You would study something, not because you're interested in it, not because you have passion for it, but just because someone else told you so. So in a way, you will always lead 2 lives. In a way, if you sacrifice your values, we take the second premise, you will always keep in your mind that idea that you wanted to be a psychologist. This is what would have made you happy, but you have sacrificed it. And you're having this one life in your own mind, but you're never living it in reality. On the other hand, you are living life here in reality, which you never wanted to live, which is kind of miserable in the end because you have sold out on your values, you have compromised on your happiness, and in this way you will have a very, very miserable existence because deep down, even if you try to repress your emotions, you will know that this life would have been possible. And incidentally, you see those people who are driven only by depression, envy, and hatred. And why is that? They see other people succeed. They see that other people become happy. And they know that they have betrayed their own principles. And I think those people deserve all the pain they can get.
Yeah, in a way they have earned it as well,
Correct.
right?